Hello there, my name's Lee Taylor. I'm engaged with the Korea Health Industry Development Institute, KIDI, and what I'd like to do today is spend a few moments of your time talking about medical devices and how Korean companies may want to consider the export of medical devices through into Europe and other markets around the world. By way of introduction, you can see on the slide the organisations that I've worked for during my career, all the way back to the British Army, Royal Army Medical Corps, through to global life science companies such as SmithKline Beecham and latterly Novartis. As I mentioned to you, what I'd like to talk about is medical devices, and I've titled the presentation Time to Act. And the reason for titling it Time to Act is that at the time of composing the presentation, the world, as you'll be no doubt aware, is gripped with the health and the economic impact of COVID-19. Some estimates are that normal business, whatever normal will be, may not return until the last quarter of 2020. Indeed, other segments of the market and other estimates are suggesting normal business may not return until first or second quarter of 2021, which is of course some time away. And I was struck recently listening to CEO Mark Zuckerberg, who many of you will know leads Facebook. And he's actually introduced a policy globally for Facebook employees that zero meetings, no meetings of 50 employees or more can take place face-to-face until at least June 2021, which is a significant decision for a global organization like Facebook, but obviously crystallizes the dilemma of many organizations around the world as to how to conduct normal business in the midst of a global economic and health crisis. So, Korean medical devices, in my view, can and should play a global role. You'll have heard that 3 of the largest exporters in the world, US, Germany, China, have halted export of certain products. And of course, those decisions may change in time. But nonetheless, the normal supply chains have been altered. Emotionally, perhaps, Trump called COVID-19 the Chinese virus. The World Health Organization has been criticized. The UN Security Council has actually been absent so far. And at the time of reporting, Korea has actually been held up as a beacon of best practice, specifically in relation to early intervention, having a prepared and high capacity healthcare system, its ability to contact trace, the use of technology, and specifically the use of IVD devices, mobile tracing and mobile alerting of its population in relation to avoiding areas of likely infection. And if we look back at some of the data, perhaps as some people, obviously in hindsight, are suggesting that perhaps we could have and should have predicted what we're seeing at the moment. We don't have to look back too far to look at the outbreaks of MERS and SARS, and small in comparison to coronavirus. But of course, what a number of healthcare professionals are suggesting is that we may be looking at a frequent and periodic outbreak of respiratory diseases, something similar and something akin to the seasonal flu, where, for example, coronavirus may be seasonal. And therefore, it's not a significant leap of faith to assume that the medical devices, and especially medical device organizations involved in disease surveillance, disease testing, tracing and treating, will become an increasingly valued segment within the Korean, within the Asian, and within the global marketplaces. So let's look specifically at Europe and compare perhaps Europe to North America, to FDA. And many of you will know that there are currently within Europe 3 directives that were published in the 90s. One specifically around active implantable medical devices, published 1990. The second, general medical devices, published 1993, and the latter, in vitro diagnostic medical devices, published in 1998. But what's of note, and a recent publication by the British Medical Journal in 2016 suggested there's some differences in terms of the preparedness, and certainly some differences in terms of the timeline for a approval within Europe versus that of North America and the FDA. And they actually looked at in excess of 300 medical devices that were approved both in US as well as in Europe, and looked at the timeline for those approvals. And as you can see from the schematic, typically medical devices in Europe are approved faster, and in some cases significantly faster than those in North America by the FDA. And indeed 63% were approved first in Europe in comparison to FDA. Now, the authors of the publication went on to suggest that there were potentially some negative mitigations associated with this speed of approval, but nonetheless, from an approval perspective, particularly for Korean manufacturers that may be looking to balance investment versus return, the speed of approval within Europe is something that you should be aware of. Now, latterly, specifically in 2017, the European authorities published and have put into statute the MDR, Medical Device Regulation. And what this looks to do is harmonise medical device assessment and approval across the European states within Europe. And if we look at the timeline of MDR, we are slap bang in the middle of the implementation phase, in that the initial structure came into force in May 2017, and that allowed manufacturers to adjust and adopt some of their procedures to ensure that by 26 May 2020, every historic and future medical device marketed within Europe would be managed by the architecture of MDR. Now, what you'll note, and particularly those of you that are used to some of the rules and regulations from pharmaceuticals, you'll note that the MDR looks to harmonise the way in which medical devices are regulated pre and post approval. And you'll see some similarities with pharmaceuticals. So for example, the post-marketing oversight, the rigorous post-marketing oversight, very similar to that which happens with pharmaceuticals. The identification and naming of an individual responsible person to ensure legally regulatory compliance. Again, very similar to what many of you will know as the QP, qualified person, within pharmaceuticals. All the way through to, particularly for class 3 and implantable medical devices, more rigorous clinical evidence to ensure that the devices are safe and effective and continue to be so. So you'll note that the architecture of medical devices and the rules and regulations for the safe promotion and safe marketing of medical devices is changing, and theoretically was coming into force effective 26 May 2020, which of course has been impacted by coronavirus. And at the time of writing this presentation, the European regulatory authorities, the European Commission, is very likely to delay the imposition or bringing into force of MDR by a further year through to May 2021, which gives organisations a little bit more time and scope to ensure that they're ready for the regulation, but also to focus on some of the required aspects of dealing with the acute issues of the global pandemic. So that was the reason for titling the presentation Time to Act, and here are my 6 key recommendations for you to consider. Firstly, if you haven't already, engage a top-tier regulatory support, either consultancy or by employing high-quality European experience regulatory capability, on the assumption, of course, that you are looking to penetrate the European medical device market. You'll need to utilise a European-based responsible person, be that either a standalone third party or through the distribution agent that you choose to work with within Europe. My advice is to start soon for all of the reasons that we've just discussed. The medical device marketplace, particularly in the aspects that we've covered, is an area of high interest and high unmet need. And the prospects for medical device revenue in Europe, North America, are robust for 2020, 21, 22 and onwards. I think also my advice would extend to consider service offering as well as the normal instruments, capital, disposables and reagents. Increasingly service offering around your product is and will continue to become a way of incrementally increasing revenue and increasing customer experience for your products. And finally, consider technology. More and more healthcare over time is inevitably going to be delivered remotely through connected systems, remote systems, and therefore considering how your product now and for the future may embrace technology and innovation, I think is an important aspect to consider. So those were the key recommendations from me, and of course I and a number of consultants at Kiddy would be more than happy to consult with you and give you our input and advice in terms of how to start or how to consolidate your approach to the European market in regards to medical devices. Thank you. Hello there, my name is Lee Taylor. I'm engaged with the Career Health Industry Development Institute, Kiddy. And what I'd like to do today is spend a few moments of your time talking about personal care, which stretches across a number of aspects that I'll go into in a moment. By way of introduction, you can see my background on the slide. It started many years ago in the British Army, the Royal Army Medical Corps, and has involved numerous small as well as large life science organisations, latterly organisations such as SmithKline, Novartis, Menarini and the like. And what I'd like to do is talk about some aspects that are relevant to exporting Korean personal care products to Europe. And I've used the word personal care to encompass a number of segments that I'll go into in a moment. But of course, at the time of writing this presentation, the world is gripped by the health and economic impact of COVID-19. The Spanish government have very recently decided to relax COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, as has the government in Austria and a small number of other European countries. Despite this positive news, I genuinely believe a significant new world will emerge, and a new world that will be attractive to Korean beauty, to K-beauty, but nonetheless will mean that you'll need to think more carefully, particularly in relation to the supply and distribution channels that you consider for your products. So I mentioned the three areas that I would put under personal care, personal beauty, consumer health and medical aesthetics. And we at Kiddy are more than happy to consult upon all aspects of personal care should you have some inquiries and questions for the European market as well as other markets around the world. For those of you that are busy, I've got a one-page summary before I dive into some of the detail, because I'm very aware that some people would like the summary at the beginning. So here it is, exec summary for the busy exec. Personal beauty space. So if you're in this space, historically quality and prestige have and probably will continue to dominate this space. Key brand names invest heavily in this space, and breaking into these markets is tough, but nonetheless possible. Because of the global economic impact, no doubt cost-conscious consumers will be inevitable. But as a result of things such as purity, exclusivity, the ability to be curative, the impact and the positive impact on anti-aging and the like, premium pricing may be afforded by some, but people that are looking to enter this space need to be very aware and very clear about the target segment that they're looking to penetrate into. In comparison, consumer health, if this is your space, my advice would be, if you haven't already, to push very, very quickly within the consumer health space, particularly if you're a disruptor, because normal shopping is closed. Unlike Korea, pretty much all of the European capitals and large cities closed. Shops closed. Unless you were a pharmacy issuing medicine or a supermarket issuing food, shopping stopped. And therefore, those things will take time to change, and everything at present is virus associated. So I think consumer health has always been of high importance, but I think particularly so and increasingly so over time. And therefore, something to consider, premium and premium pricing may now be affordable for some, particularly if it's in the personal health related space. So, if we look at some of the commonly stated product benefits across these segments, much is spoken about with regards to anti-aging, to the ability of a product to moisturize, to uplift, to smooth and to replenish and to hydrate. And these are key product benefits that need to be considered in a clear and succinct way. Looking at data, certainly hydrating is something that people across the world and in particular regions are definitely looking for. And when it comes to Europe, you need to be careful and considered as to how you position your claims, particularly for cosmetic products. So let's assume for a moment your product is a cosmetic. What would be some of the claims that you would not be able to make as a cosmetic within Europe? You probably wouldn't be able to say you treat, Because if you treat something, you're not a cosmetic. If you treat something, you're more likely to be a medical device or a pharmaceutical from a regulatory perspective. You probably wouldn't be able to say that you restore or that you cure, that you rejuvenate, that you repair, you lift, or you prevent. These, from a regulatory perspective, would be some of the claims that probably would not be supportable if your products are cosmetic. Whereas if you are a cosmetic, and of course you've got the literature to support it, your product probably could be claiming to clean, to protect, to cover, perhaps to mask, and of course perhaps to perfume. Alcohol-free, fragrance-free are claims that are acceptable for cosmetics, assuming that the product of course is alcohol and fragrance-free, and of course moisturize, smooth and replenish. So you'll see from a regulatory standpoint within Europe, there are some things that you can say and there are some things that you can't say from a cosmetics perspective. Promotional channels. These are incredibly important to think about before you start, and there's a schematic here that just gives you a flavour of the options for you to consider in terms of promotional channel. And the reason why I include this as quite a key factor is your promotional channel, your distribution channel, is an essential decision for you, which impacts on numerous factors and is a key factor in relation to setting product price. So let me give you a few examples, and you can see here in US dollars the value of the distribution channels for beauty and personal care products across Europe. So for example, specialist retail stores are quite a significant distribution channel in terms of value. So in Korea that would be something like Hyundai Mall, whereas in England, for example, in the UK, it would be John Lewis. And there are 50 John Lewis stores in the UK alone that act in a very similar way to the way of distribution that you have through establishments such as Hyundai Mall in Korea. The largest segment you can see there in the middle is the pharmacy and the drugstore segment. So in Korea that would be something like Olive Young, whereas in the UK that would be Boots. And Boots has 2,500 stores across the UK and is one of the dominant pharmacy chains, which if you were looking to penetrate mainstream pharmacy in the UK and elsewhere, you would have to have a placement within Boots to be successful. All the way through to other distribution channels and the online market, which, as you can see when you look at the data here, is one of the more rapidly growing segments, albeit not the largest segment. And certainly from a UK and Europe perspective, if you're gonna buy beauty and personal care online, the first place you're probably gonna go to purchase your product is Amazon. And therefore having a strong position within Amazon would be critical. But be aware, of course, such as you know from search engines in Asia and Korea, that one drives price, and people invariably search entities, platforms like Amazon and Nava based on price. So I think it's critical to decide how you want to promote your product, which of these channels you want to exploit, and of course you can choose to exploit one or you can choose to exploit all. And those are decisions that need to be taken early on in terms of your strategic marketing plan. I mentioned online because I think bearing in mind the situation we face currently globally in terms of health impact from COVID, and the fact that as I present now, most shops in Europe are shut. Online is obviously something that you need to consider very, very carefully, certainly for Europe now, and I would suggest in the future. And here's an example of a major player, Colgate, who decided late last year to exclusively launch a new product online. And interestingly, even more interestingly, they happened to decide to launch this product exclusively online in ground zero for COVID in China. So it'll be fascinating to see how Miracle Repair C toothpaste does, only launched in China and only launched online. And what's of note, despite the current issues of COVID, the senior managers within Colgate believe that young consumers are taking anti-aging products in skin and health and otherwise, and they're looking to provide benefits to themselves at an early age. And so in comparison perhaps to some of the manufacturers from a face cream perspective that have perhaps focused upon later age consumers, Colgate have definitely taken a view to go at early age consumers for their particular toothpaste. The other aspect that I think is really important to understand, and certainly from a European perspective is important to understand, is the influence of friends and family. And you can see here in this schematic that the historic influences, such as physicians and the like, or indeed free samples or discounts in store, of course these things have an impact upon the choice of a particular personal care product that you might elect. But increasingly you can see that the influence of friends and family, and perhaps through social media friends and family, these are increasing factors for you to consider for your brand to get breadth and depth of usage throughout the beauty and personal care sector. So, a brief overview of personal care and personal hygiene, and here are some of my key insights for you to consider. In a post-COVID world, our health and hygiene, our personal looks, and indeed our mental image will be all the more important. It always was important, but I think increasingly so, particularly to the young, particularly to the aspiring, and of course the affluent who have the ability to pay for premium products. We should be looking to embrace concepts in personal hygiene, very much to explore the anti-aging opportunities that are growing significantly within the world, and wherever possible focus on innovative segments, looking to disrupt in a marketplace with a core essence that's attractive to the target audience is critical. You must take the time to fully understand your target customer through market assessment and market research, and fully understand their wants, desires and aspirations, which is critical to understanding how you position your product with those companies. And finally, embrace connectivity, social media and remote platforms, which certainly this year and increasingly over time are going to be essential to spread the impact and the uptake of your particular product regionally and globally. So for me, that's the end of the presentation. It's time to spread, and we'd be more than happy to take an email should you wish for us to consult on any aspects of personal care within the business domains that I mentioned. Have a great day, and thank you very much.